Inside this 6-ton ice block, there was actually a pair of human shoes. It was discovered by a French Arctic expedition team during a recent explosion. To uncover the truth, they excavated the entire frozen person from the ice, placed it in a large iron box, and transported it back to France by helicopter. Then, the professor held a press conference. After the ice block melted, the person inside surprisingly showed a heartbeat. Investigation revealed that 65 years ago, a cargo ship carrying glycerin passed by and sank after unfortunately hitting an iceberg. The frozen man was wrapped in glycerin, which allowed him to survive. Moreover, the man still looked 25 years old. This scene was seen by Dehai, who was hosting a party at home. Dehai found it very amusing. Which unlucky guy suddenly has a young grandfather? While he was laughing heartily, the police arrived at his home. It turned out the mayor had summoned him personally. Thinking something good was happening, Dehai hurried over. The mayor told Dehai that DNA comparison revealed the frozen man was his wife's grandfather. This was a slap in the face. Dehai incredulously told his wife, who had never seen her grandfather and thought he had long passed away. When they went to the cemetery to check, they found there was indeed no spot for the grandfather. To verify the truth, Dehai found a photo of the grandfather when he was young in the alley. They took the photo to the research institute, and under the professor's guidance, they approached the grandfather. The wife was terrified by the hairy creature lying on the bed, repeatedly shouting that this monster couldn't possibly be her grandfather. Dehai excitedly took out the photo, saying the grandfather should look like this. To convince them completely, the doctor cut off the grandfather's long beard and shaved him clean. Seeing the clean and handsome grandfather, the wife happily stepped forward, confirming it was indeed her grandfather. "Thank you so much for bringing him back." The wife wanted to take the grandfather home to live. However, the professor said he now belongs to the state and not to them personally. He will make a great contribution to human progress. If you want to see him, you can visit regularly. The wife didn't want the grandfather to be treated like a guinea pig and demanded Dehai bring him back, or else he would never sleep in the room again. At this moment, the doctor approached Dehai and said, "Tomorrow, Grandpa will be transported to another place, and they can switch during the transfer." The Crown Prince's expedition team discovered a 65-year-old human popsicle in the Arctic. After the popsicle melted, the man miraculously came back to life. Dehai's wife, wanting to bring the resurrected grandpa home, hired someone to impersonate staff and secretly drugged the professor on the plane. Then they swapped the professor with grandpa. Dehai successfully transported grandpa out, while the professor was taken to the hospital. When the professor woke up from his coma, the staff claimed he had fallen off a horse. Summer's memory should be a bit confused. "What's going on? Isn't this the line I used to fool grandpa?" The professor said he was indeed the professor. But the pretty nurse didn't believe him and insisted on pinning him to the hospital bed. It wasn't until someone who knew the professor came along that they believed his story. The professor realized grandpa must have been swapped and urged them to call for help immediately. Then, the government dispatched helicopters. The roads were filled with spikes, and a group of videos began the chase. The helicopter quickly spotted the car. To avoid being caught, they quickly hid in a monastery. After the monk led them into a room, he hoped that grandpa would in the future. Also said it was all fate. By this time, the outside was already surrounded by the military. To escape quickly, Dehai found some monk robes, changed clothes, and was about to leave when the professor approached. The four of them quickly pretended to chat. The professor walked towards them calmly. Unexpectedly, the doctor's mental fortitude was so poor that he fainted at the sight of the professor. The unmarked grandpa fell directly to the ground. This fall completely woke grandpa up. He looked up at his wife. Because his wife looked very much like grandpa's mother, very much alike, grandpa actually called her Mom. To avoid scaring the newly awakened grandpa, his wife had to agree with him, saying she wanted to go home. To avoid upsetting grandpa, the professor had to agree to her request. But to better conduct scientific research, they couldn't let grandpa know the truth. First, the castle had to be restored to its original state. Not only that, but even the pedestrians and cars on the street were changed to look exactly like they did 65 years ago. Before long, grandpa woke up in the room. He immediately noticed the maid Sophie who was taking care of him. He still wanted to have a friendly chat with him, which really scared Sophie. Wang Wu went downstairs to inform his wife. Actually, Sophie was the son's girlfriend. In order to continue living in the castle, Dehai had to pretend to be grandpa's father. When he disguised himself and went to grandpa's room, he was directly kicked out by grandpa. It turns out that grandpa's father was a philanderer back in the day, abandoning grandpa and his mother for another woman. In the end, they had to divorce. Originally, it was his own castle, but now he was directly kicked out. Dehai was very angry and insisted on barging into the castle. The professor told Dehai that the current grandpa is everyone's grandpa. If you dare to make grandpa unhappy, you're making everyone unhappy. In the end, the professor directly had the police arrest Dehai. A man, after being frozen in the Arctic for 65 years and then revived, mistook his granddaughter for his mother and even encouraged him to remarry for happiness. So, Dehai pretended to be his wife's suitor and came to the castle with flowers. Sophie couldn't help but laugh when she saw him. To ensure that his mother's boyfriend was trustworthy, Grandpa took Dahai to the study for a serious interrogation. First, the initial question was surprisingly, "How did your wife die?" Dahai could only make up a story. Although his answers were nonsensical, fortunately, Grandpa still respected his mother's choice. Next, Dahai had to pursue his wife again. Grandpa observed them through the window. Dahai was almost driven mad. They had been married for 20 years, yet they had to pretend to be in love again. Dahai arranged a marriage for his son. On this day, the arranged girlfriend Annie and her parents came to visit. However, the son only liked Sophie, who was pretending to be a maid. When Dahai took his son downstairs, he found Grandpa expressing love to Annie. The situation was getting complicated. His own grandpa was competing with his son for a girlfriend. Dahai was almost driven mad. Soon, it was evening. Since Dahai was still pretending to be his wife's suitor, he couldn't stay overnight. He first pretended to leave in front of Grandpa. After Grandpa returned to his room, he sneaked back, and the two of them suddenly felt a thrill. Grandpa, who was in an excited state, didn't sleep but wrote a love letter to Annie. He happily took the letter and knocked on his wife's door. At this moment, Dahai was sleeping like a log on the bed, and his wife couldn't wake him up no matter how hard she tried, so she had to kick him onto the floor. When Grandpa came into the room, the awakened Dahai quickly hid under the bed. Grandpa read the love letter to his wife, hoping she could give some advice. To make his wife stop him, Dahai started causing trouble under the bed, lifting the bedboard high. His wife, not to be outdone, punched and made a grand scene. Grandpa was so scared that he froze on the spot. Not knowing what was happening, Grandpa read again, and Dahai lifted the bedboard once more. Then another grand scene popped out. Grandpa thought he wrote very well, and that his mother was too moved. He handed the love letter to the butler, asking him to deliver it to Annie. Dahai felt this should be nipped in the bud. He intercepted the butler halfway, causing a mess. To mend his son's relationship with Annie, the next day, Dahai had his son read the love letter in front of Annie. Annie thought he wrote wonderfully and happily rewarded him with a kiss, which Grandpa saw from behind the window, and he was so excited that he immediately broke through the window, went up, and harshly scolded his son. The son was about to break down, wondering what kind of life this was. Dahai couldn't take it anymore and decided to reveal the truth. Dahai pressed Grandpa onto a chair, shouting continuously. He first explained everyone's true identity to Grandpa, as well as the various advanced technologies of today. The more Dahai talked, the more excited he became, while Grandpa listened with great composure. To make Grandpa believe him more, Dahai insisted on opening the cabinet to show the TV inside. A group of people hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. In the end, Dahai, like a madman, was chased out by the crowd. Grandpa went up alone and opened the cabinet, finding a TV he had never seen before. Then, following the instructions, he turned on the TV, which was broadcasting a military program. Seeing all the high-tech planes, Grandpa finally believed Dahai's words. This left him a bit at a loss. At this moment, Annie, who had been watching from the side, came over and gently comforted Grandpa. In fact, Annie had long been fond of Grandpa. They held hands and rushed outside. Annie wanted to take him to find the 65 years he had lost. Finally, with his wife's blessing, Grandpa and Annie walked into the hall of marriage. But just at their wedding, the wife received a letter from the ocean. She actually froze herself, hoping to be revived 50 years later. By then, she could have a good chat with the grandfather of her modern-day wife. The movie, Hibernatus, ends here. It's a French comedy film from 196 years ago, starring the famous French comedian Louis de Funès. Her own grandfather competing with her son for a girlfriend. Back then, the French really had quite the imagination. If you want to see more great movie explanations, please follow me.